So if you do your family the courtesy of taking the trouble to write your will, then the expectation is quite reasonably within your family that what you've written down, the plan that you've put in place, will be implemented smoothly exactly as you wish after you've passed away. So it can be an absolute sickener for your family to learn that there's a fatal defect with your will. And it's a lot more common than you might think for that to happen. It's something that happens very often with people who write their own will, because there's so many little unexpected traps that you can fall into without realising. And it can also happen in other circumstances as well. But it's an issue that comes up, not infrequently, let's put it that way, in my kind of day-to-day practice. So a very recent example for me, really, that has just recently come to a conclusion after a long period of sort of trying to sort it out, was a lady who came to me a couple of years ago now, actually, and she was the named executor in the will of her brother who'd recently passed away. And in his will, he had left his entire estate to her two sons, his two nephews, basically. Now, when we first got together, me and this lady, I obviously read through the will with her, and I could see straight away that he'd written it himself, because there's certain telltale signs, basically, and it was kind of 90% there, but there was a couple of really obvious defects, that I could see straight away that might not have been entirely obvious to the casual observer. So there was two paragraphs that basically contradicted themselves in terms, and it was an accident, really. This gentleman, obviously, he'd been doing his research and trying to learn how to make his own will, and he'd obviously found examples of the appropriate wording and stuff like that, but he'd applied it incorrectly, and so by accident he'd created an internally contradictory will, basically, that potentially made no sense. Although, yes, you could be charitable in your interpretation and go, yeah, this is what you meant overall, He'd also made a mistake in the way that he executed his will, because he hadn't put the date in properly. So that was immediately obvious, and obviously I mentioned all of that to this lady when we first met, and really the outcome was, look, we're just going to have to apply to the probate service. They're going to have to scrutinise it, take a view, and they will ask extra questions, I'm sure, and then they will come to a conclusion as to whether the will is valid or not. But I can't tell you for sure that this will is valid, so be aware of that. It's kind of important to manage expectations, really, Now, went ahead with this application and obviously waited for the probate service to scrutinise and consider what their opinion was of the validity of this will. But then we were overtaken by events, because it turned out that this deceased gentleman actually had a biological daughter that he hadn't had anything to do with for years and years and years. They'd completely lost touch, almost like they'd forgotten about each other, really, But obviously she'd learned that her biological father had passed away. She'd taken legal advice and she'd instructed solicitors to get in touch. And what her solicitors correctly did was apply to put a caveat on the estate. So what that means is that they put in a notification with the probate service to basically block the process that I'd applied for here, to block the probate service from continuing with scrutinising and verifying this will, and prevent them from issuing a grant of probate to authorise this lady from going forward with implementing the contents of the will. It's something that's always done by contentious probate solicitors to protect their challenging parties' interests while the challenge is going on. So anyway, I had to down tools then, and it was taken over by one of my colleagues who specialises in court cases. And so, I kind of dipped in and out over the last couple of years, providing information and guidance as necessary. But ultimately, after going through quite a lengthy process and a lot of hefty negotiations, a settlement agreement was arrived at, which resulted in this gentleman's biological daughter inheriting a very large proportion of this gentleman's estate, and then the remainder of the estate being divided amongst a long list of family members. So ultimate upshot, basically, for, you know, the guy who passed away was that his intentions, as he'd laid out or attempted to lay out in his will, were not followed at all, which, of course, sickener, you know, if he could have, like, jumped into a time machine and seen, you know, what the outcome would have been, he'd have been a bit fed up, basically, and perhaps he'd have, you know, thought to get some guidance. So this story I'm sharing with you just kind of illustrates how very, very important it is for you to just understand and know what the important elements are for a legally valid will. And if you're going to do it yourself, feel free, you know, by all means do it, but just do it being aware of what criteria you have to hit. But it's always a good precaution, basically, to get professional guidance and maybe get it professionally done. Number one, so that you've got some reassurance, you know, that it's going to be done properly, and you've got a safety net that if it isn't done properly, if some kind of a mistake has happened or whatever, you've gone to somebody who's professional and, more importantly, is insured, so that your family can actually be compensated for any loss that might arise as a result of some invalid element to the will, you know. So over the next few videos, I'm just gonna explain a little bit more about the key things that have to absolutely be in place for a will to be valid, so that you just understand a bit more about it. If you decide to take the plunge and make it yourself, go for it, but you know where you stand, you know. Or you may say, no, I think I'm just going to get some advice on this and sort myself out with the appropriate support, which again is a perfectly valid choice. Now, if this story, or what I'm talking about today, raises questions or thoughts that you'd like to just learn a little bit more about, do please feel free to drop me an email, ask me any kind of question that you want to. I'm always delighted to hear from you and always really happy to answer your questions and provide you with extra information as you need it, as it pertains to your specific situation. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again soon. Bye.